To teach how to live without certainty and yet without being paralyzed by hesitation is perhaps the chief thing that philosophy in our age can still do for those who study it. With this quote by Bertrand Russell from A History of Western Philosophy, I, Shivangi Sharma, a research scholar of Department of Philosophy, Lucknow University, welcome you all to the 12th edition of Saturday Seminar Series. Today's speaker of the seminar is Professor B. Sambhasiva Prasad, who is going to speak on the topic Russell's Theory of Knowledge, a study of its development. Dr. Sambhasiva Prasad is the former professor and head of Department of Philosophy, Sri Venkateswara University, Tirupati. There, he taught philosophy to PG students for over 30 years and guided PhD and MPhil students. Under his guidance, 8 students got PhD degrees and 6 other students have secured their MPhil degrees. Professor Prasad's PhD work was on the philosophy of sense data, and his area of specialization has been logic, analytic philosophy, and Bertrand Russell's philosophy. After his superannuation at Sri Venkateswar University, Professor Prasad was invited to be the director of GITAM School of Gandhian Studies, deemed to be University, Vishakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh. Since then, he worked at its director from 2010 to 2015. He was awarded ICPR Senior Research Fellowship in 2017 for his project on Gandhian economics, which he completed in 2018. Professor Prasad also served as the member of Indian Council for Philosophical Research. Professor Prasad has authored 3 books and edited various works. He has published 40 plus research papers in anthologies, journals, and seminar proceedings. Some of them were published in reputed journals like JICPR, IPQ, and Gandhi Mark. He has presented over 70 research papers in both national and international conferences. He has been to USA, Switzerland, and Seoul, South of Korea, and presented at various international conferences. We welcome you, sir. Now, for abstract reading, I would like to call Ms. Diksha Shukla, another research scholar from Department of Philosophy, Lucknow University. Over to you, Diksha.
Hello, am I visible and audible?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon to all. The title of today's seminar is Russell's Theory of Knowledge, a study of its development. Bertrand Russell's 1872 to 1970 theory of knowledge figures predominantly in his books The Problems of Philosophy, Our Knowledge of External World, Mysticism and Logic, The Analysis of Mind, An Outline of Philosophy, and My Philosophical Development. In these works, Russell frequently changes his views on the problem of our knowledge of the external world. The objective of this lecture is to trace the origin and development of Russell's theory of knowledge as depicted in these works. In his Problem of Philosophy, Russell observes that what we directly perceive are only appearances and not the real properties of the physical object. For instance, when we perceive a table, the colors, the shapes, sizes, sense data that we directly perceive are not the real properties of table but are causally related to it. The real table is beyond our comprehension. It is like Kant's thing in itself. It is only inferred as the cause of our sense data. In this work, Russell introduces the notion of sense data. He makes a distinction between sensation and the sense data and claims that while sensations are mind dependent, sense data are not. Again, he distinguishes between sense data and physical objects and says that while sense data are private and indubitable, physical objects are public and dubitable. Russell demarcates physical spaces and time on the one hand and private space and time on the other, and says that while physical objects exist in physical space and time, sense data are in private space and time of the individual. The physical space is as is as uh, unperceivable and the space of sight of a born blind man. So also physical time is unknowable. The view that Russell subscribes in his problem of philosophy is that causal theory of perception. However, Russell dispenses with this view in his next important work, Our Knowledge of External World. There Russell no more upheld the causal theory of knowledge, but devoted the phenomenalistic view of perception. According to it, sense data are not appearances but real properties of the physical object, which is a construction of actual and possible sense data. Construction is not an inference but a synthetic supposition synthetic supposition or a hypothesis. Russell's phenomenalistic view of perception is continued in his next work, Mysticism and Logic. Here he upheld the distinction between the actual and possible sense data and called the unperceived sense data at sensibilia. In 1921, when he published The Analysis of Mind, under the influence of William James, Russell subscribed the philosophy of neutral monism, which does not believe in the radical distinction between a distinction between physics and psychology. Consequently, the distinction between sensation and sense data is dispensed with. Here, Russell viewed that what we directly perceive are events which are neither physical nor mental but are neutral in status. Seeing a color, touching the coolness, etc., are such events. The events are causally related to the physical object. Russell upholds in his philosophy of neutral monism in his much later works like An Outline of Philosophy and My Philosophical Development. In these works, Russell's causal theory of perception reappears again, which he originally advocated in his Problems of Philosophy. However, there is a difference between the two. In the Problems of Philosophy, Russell accepts the distinction between sensation and sense data, but he has dispensed with such distinction in his much later works, like An Outline of Philosophy, where he replaces the term sense data with events under the influence of neutral monism. Thank you so much. Over to you, Shivangidi.
Thank you, Diksha. To extend a formal note of welcome, I would like to call Head of the Department Philosophy, Professor K.C. Pandey. Sir, over to you.
Uh, I welcome everybody in this Saturday seminar of Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow. Particularly, I would like to extend a hearty welcome to our speaker, Professor Sambhasiva Prasad from Visakhapatnam, and uh, I welcome to all the teachers.
Am I audible?
I'm
Yes,
oh,
Dee, you are audible.
Okay, thank you.
wonderful. And first of all, I would like to welcome Professor Sambhasiva Prasad for accepting my invitation and uh, coming to deliver this seminar at the Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow. So, Professor Sambhasiva Prasad from Visakhapatnam, the lovely city of India. I welcome you, sir, uh, and I welcome all the teachers, research scholars, students, particularly of Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow, as well as everybody who is here from different parts of India. This is a very humble beginning of philosophical reflexes, philosophical activities from the Department of Philosophy, University of Lucknow, and I welcome everybody here present. With this brief welcome note, I would like to personally invite Professor Sambhasiva Prasad to deliver his lecture. Professor Sambhasiva Prasad, sir.
Professor K.C. Pandeyji, Head Department of Philosophy, Lucknow University, Lucknow, learned faculty, dear student friends. It gives me immense pleasure to associate myself with the Saturday seminar program that was being held by the Department of Philosophy of Lucknow University, Lucknow. And in this context, I am deeply thankful to Professor Pandeyji for giving me this wonderful opportunity to participate in this program. I have to congratulate Professor Pandeyji for organizing this program first. Earlier, I enjoyed the lectures in this program by eminent scholars like Professor Bhatt, Professor Paneer Selvam, Professor Das, and many more. And I learned a lot from their lectures. And really, they started a program organized by Professor Pandey. It is a wonderful opportunity for a number of scholars who are interested in philosophy to enjoy and to learn through this program across the country. As it has been already indicated, the topic of my lecture is Russell's theory of knowledge, a study of its development. My study of Bertrand Russell's works, it began with my PhD program, which I did many years back. The topic of my research was philosophy of sense data. In this context, I have read the writings of G. Moore, Bertrand Russell, and others. So the writings of Bertrand Russell fascinated me, and I like the style of Bertrand Russell's writings, the way how he writes, the way how he puts his ideas. I like immensely, and since then I developed an interest on Professor Russell's writings. When I read the works of Russell, I never felt that I am reading a book. I felt as though Russell himself is speaking with me. So this is the kind of style Russell maintained in his works. Really, this seminar, it enabled me to refresh my memory of Russell's writings on epistemology, which I read long back. And again, I have the opportunity to work on this thing. My teachers used to say that man works out of compulsion. So the invitation of Professor Pandeyji, it gave me an opportunity again to read the writings of Russell again and to refresh my memory. And had it not been had I not received the invitation of Professor Pandey to deliver this talk, I would have not read again the works of Russell. And really, I feel that this seminar gave me an opportunity to refresh, to read Russell's works again, second time in my second or third time in my career. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Professor Rakesh, good evening.
Good evening.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Pleasure hearing you.
Okay. Bertrand Russell worked mainly in England, especially at Cambridge. His early fame was bestowed upon him due to his contributions to logic. He taught Wittgenstein at Cambridge before the First World War. He considered Wittgenstein as his student and friend. Russell said that he has learned many new ideas from his student friend Wittgenstein, especially on logical atomism. And out of the two works, namely Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus and my philosophical investigations, Russell said that he was more attracted and he was more interested about the Wittgenstein's first work, namely Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Russell's later work, though initially Russell worked on logic and mathematics, his later works are on epistemology, metaphysics, philosophy of mind. He based himself mainly on the empirical tradition of Hume and Mill. He also stressed upon the philosophy of modern scientific development. A prolific writer, Russell was also famous for his political and social commitment. He was awarded Nobel Prize in 1950 for his literary works. Russell's works are divergent. He has written on many subjects. He has written on logic, physics, mind, education, politics, religion, and other social problems. So, to put it in the words of Alan Wood, Russell is a philosopher without philosophy. He is a philosopher of all philosophies because he has written on so wide range of topics. The aim of my lecture today is to expound Russell's theory of knowledge and to trace its development. Especially here in this context, I have taken 6 books of Bertrand Russell. One is The Problems of Philosophy, published 1912. Our Knowledge of the External World, 1914. Mysticism and Logic, 1918. The Analysis of Mind, 1921. An Outline of Philosophy, published 1927. And My Philosophical Development, published 1959. In these works, Russell discussed about his problem of knowledge, but he often switches over from one standpoint to another standpoint because his aim is to arrive at truth. I am going to take up these works, and my aim is to show how Russell's theory of knowledge has been developed from one work to another work. First, let us take his work, Problems of Philosophy, published 1912. His work is a very important and seminal work of Professor Bertrand Russell, and in this work, the first chapter is title is Appearance and Reality. In this chapter, Russell said there is what we directly perceive or what we immediately know are only appearances but not real objects. Russell illustrates his point through the perception of a table. Russell said, if you perceive a table, we directly perceive some color, colors. But the color, Russell says that it is not the real that we perceive. The colors that we perceive, they are not the real properties of the table. Why? Because the point of Russell is that the color that I perceive, it depends upon the distance and the angle of my perception of the table. Therefore, the colors that I perceive, they vary from one angle of vision to another angle of vision, or from one perspective to another perspective. Therefore, we do not know the real color of the table. Even from the same perspective, Russell says the colors differ. For example, if I see a color, a brown, a color, say brown, but if through artificial light, I will see another color. When there is no light, I will not perceive any color. It will be completely dark. Therefore, the point of Russell is the colors that I perceive, they are not the real properties of the table. They are not the real property of the table. Okay? Then, could we perceive the texture of the table? Next question he rises. Even texture of the table, Russell says, we cannot see the real texture of the table. To the naked eye, the table appears to be smooth, but when I see the table from using a microscope, it appears to me rough, and the roughness of the table, it increases when I increase the power of my microscope. So therefore, we do not know what is the real texture of the table, but the texture of the table that I perceive, it is only an appearance, but not the real quality of the table. Then here comes to shapes of the table. The shape of the table depends upon my angle of vision, my distance of vision of the table, and it is only an appearance, but it is not the real property of the table. What about the touches? Russell says that when we see press the table it is appears to be here the table. I will feel hardness, but the more I press the table, the more hardness that I perceive. So therefore, we do not know what is the real say sense of the touch of the table. So also sounds. Sounds vary. When I rap the table, I will hear some sound. But if somebody raps the table from a distance, then my sounds are feeble. When I come closer to the table, the sounds that I hear, there will be they will increase the volume of the sound. So ultimately, the conclusion of Russell here is, he writes, thus it becomes evident that the real table, if there is one, is not the same as what we immediately experience by sight or touch or hearing. The real table, if there is one, is not immediately known to us at all, but must be an inference from what is immediately known. This is the important statement of Bertrand Russell in his chapter on appearance and reality. Okay. Now, here in this context, Russell introduces the notion of sense data. Russell says, when I see the color of the table, all right, I'm seeing a color. Now, seeing the color, it is act of sensation, and the color by itself is the object of sensation. Seeing of color, it depends upon my mind, but the object of sensation, namely color, is independent of my mind. This is the argument also of Professor G. Moore in his famous article, Refutation of Idealism. There, Moore argues that when you perceive the blue color, seeing of blue color is act of sensation that depends upon your mind. But the blue color itself is independent of your sensation, and it is independent of your mind. It exists on its own. So thus he makes what is dependent upon your mind and what is independent of your mind. Now the question is, why should this Moore and Russell also introduce this sense data? Here, they wanted to refute the idealism of Berkeley. According to Berkeley, esse est percipi. Nothing exists independent of my mind. So, but now Russell argues that there is something independent of your mind, namely what's called a color, a shape, a size that you perceive. The color that you see, seeing of color depends upon our mind, but the color itself is independent of our mind. It could exist on its own. So, this is the kind of distinction that Russell makes, and he wanted to refute to Berkeley thesis that esse est percipi. So, the point of Moore and also Russell is to establish realism against the doctrine of idealism. In this context, the Russell introduces the notion of sense data and say the sense data are independent of your mind. What are sense data? The colors, the shapes, the sizes, the sounds, the textures that we perceive, they are the sense data. They are immediately known. But they are not the real properties of the physical object. Physical object, it is something inferred through your what you directly know. This is the point that Russell wants to explain. Now, in this context, now the question is, sir, am I audible, sir?
Perfectly. Don't. Yes, sir. Always audible.
Sir, am I?
Yeah. If you, yeah. Perfect, sir.
Okay, sir.
Don't worry.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And now, as I already told you, that we do not know the real properties of the table, like the color, shape, size, etc. Now, the question is, at least, could I know the space of the physical object? The physical object is unknowable. This is what we are telling, what Russell said. But could I know the space of the physical object? Now, Prasad says, no, you do not know the space of the physical object, because what you perceive is only a sense datum or a sense data that are there in your private space, not in physical space. The physical space is the space where the physical object exists, not your sense data. And now, why the argument, Russell, is your space of sight differs from your space of touch. I'm seeing some space of sight. I'm seeing some space through my eyes, space of sight. And when I close my eyes and touch the table, I will feel the space of touch. But the space of sight is different from the space of touch. They are not identical. So also, this your private space, where your sense data occupy, they are not the physical space of the physical object. So also he says the time of the physical object also is not known. Time varies. When you feel happy, time passes quickly. When you feel bored, the time passes slowly. So therefore, your perception, your understanding, your knowledge of time is relative. But the physical time is something different from these private times. So Russell thus says that there is a difference. What we directly perceive are only appearances, are only sense data. That is, they are only appearances. They are not the real properties of the physical object. They are not, we do not perceive the real properties of physical objects. We do not perceive the space and time of the physical objects. So then how do we know that it is a physical object at all? Yes. See, I can have indirect knowledge of the physical object. At the most, I can say that this is the physical object. A table is a physical object. It is the physical object which causes the sense data. The colors, the shapes, the sizes, the sounds, etc. that I am perceiving, they are the appearances of the physical object, and the physical object, which is real in itself, causes this sense data. This is what Russell comes to the conclusion. In these problems of philosophy, Russell makes a distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. And he says, we are acquainted with sense data, like colors, shapes, sizes, etc. When I perceive the external world, when I perceive the objects of the external world, I perceive only, I am acquainted with the sense data. That is our knowledge of, that is the knowledge by acquaintance, and I describe the physical object in, I know that there is a physical object in terms of a description. We can say table is something that causes the sense data. So my knowledge of sense data is knowledge by acquaintance. My knowledge of physical object is knowledge by description. I describe a physical object that which causes this sense data, so and so. But the real properties of the physical object, the real space, the real time of the physical objects is something unknowable. And it is what science calls matter, this physical object. All the physical objects, they constitute the matter of science. It is this matter of science, it says it is independent of your mind, but Berkeley says that they are dependent of our mind because all things, all objects are the ideas in the mind of God. This statement, this proposition of Berkeley, Russell wanted to refute. So therefore, he has propounded this theory. This is some and substance of the points of Russell's problems of philosophy. There are few chapters, first chapters, where he has explained about your knowledge of the physical objects. Friends, the conclusion we have derived is from the problems of philosophy is our knowledge is restricted to only appearances. They are knowledge by acquaintance, and we do not know the real properties of the physical object. Physical objects are those that eludes our grasp. They are like thing in itself of Immanuel Kant. Kant says that we have knowledge of percepts, but not knowledge of thing in itself. Thing in itself is something unknowable. In the same fashion, Russell speaks that the real objects are unknowable. Now, I'm switching over to next one. This is the position Russell had in the year 1912. But when it comes to in 1914, when Russell published his book, Our Knowledge of the External World, there Russell has realized something, and he thought that what the theory that he proposed in his problems philosophy may not be correct. He was under the view that if I do not know the nature of the physical object, when I do not know the properties of the physical object, when I do not know the space and time of the physical object, then such a physical object is very shadowy and it eludes my grasp. It is something unacceptable. This is what Russell felt. So therefore, he has dispensed with this idea in his next work, namely Our Knowledge of the External World, which was published in the year 1914. In this book, namely Our Knowledge of the External World, Russell subscribed a theory, a view, which is called the phenomenalistic view of perception. In this according to this, Russell switched over to another position. He says, after all, the sense data means, now I'm repeating that nothing but the colors, the shapes, the sizes, etc. that we perceive directly, immediately know. The sense data, they are not the appearances of the physical object, but they are the real properties of the physical object. For that, he illustrates his under a point through the perception of a table again. Russell said, suppose two people are perceiving the table. They get two perspectives of the table. When a third man comes and sits in between these two people, he will get another perspective, namely perspective. That perspective is in between the two perspectives of the people of earlier people. Thus, when the table is perceived, different people, they perceive different perspectives of the table. And these different perspectives are no more appearances, but they are the real properties of the table. They are the real properties of the physical object. This, and Russell said, that he has realized the importance. And what is this table then? The table is not a, how do you know the real table? The real table is not inferred from sense data, as he said in appearance in problems of philosophy, but he said it is a construction out of sense data, because the real table, because the properties are, because the sense data are not the appearance of the table, but they are real properties of the table. Therefore, the physical object is a construction out of these sense data. It is known as a construction. Russell said he switched over from inferential theory that occupy in private space and physical objects that occupy in the physical space and time. Russell made a demarcation. He made a distinction between physical space and private space, physical time and private time. Now, in our knowledge of the external world, where Russell has come to construction is in the place of inference, he no more distinguishes between physical space and private space and physical time and private time. And he said that after all physical objects exist in physical space, the physical space is nothing more than the construction of private spaces or perspectives. Suppose when different people perceive a table, they have different perspectives. Their perspectives are there in the private spaces. Table is a construction of these different perspectives, and the physical space where the table exists, real table, where the table exists, is that space is the construction of all the private spaces where the perspective, these different perspectives exist. So the gap between the private space and the public and the physical space, private time and physical time, has been dispensed with in this work, namely our knowledge of the external world. Friends, I want to tell you that Russell, though made a demarcation, some difference between the problems of philosophy and our knowledge of external world, saying that in the problems of philosophy, he said that we see only appearances and not real objects. Maintained the term sense data in both the works, either problems of philosophy, our knowledge of the external world. He makes the distinction between act of sensation and object of sensation. This distinction, it exists both in his problems of philosophy and our knowledge of the external world. Though there is a difference, yes, and this difference and this distinction between act of sensation and object of sensation, and he continued in his next work, Mysticism and Logic, which was published in I think the 18 or so. There, in Mysticism and Logic, Russell said sensation is psychical, depends upon mind. But sense data are independent of your mind. This is what Russell said. And Russell said, in this mysticism and logic, there is a very possibility for the uncensored sense data. Sense data, there will be every possibility for uncensored sense data. These uncensored sense data, Russell calls by the term sensibles. Sensibles. He said, a sensible becomes sense data here, just like men become husbands when they get married. When a man gets married, he becomes a husband. So also a sensible becomes a sense datum when it is perceived by the percipient. You cannot ask the question, can husbands exist without marriage? So also you cannot question, we cannot raise the question, can sense data exist without being perceived? There cannot be sense data without being perceived because the moment the sensible is perceived, it becomes sense data. So the distinction between sensation and sense data, that means the physics and psychology, it persists in his work, namely Mysticism and Logic. Up to this is all right. But the distinction between physics and psychology, now, Russell, he has dispensed with in his next work, namely The Analysis of Mind. The Analysis of Mind, that is the book where he has published in the year 1921. In this book, Russell no more makes a distinction between act of sensation and object of sensation. No more accepts sense data. He says what we directly perceive are not sense data, but what we directly perceive are events. He says, what are events? Events are neither physical nor mental, but they are neutral in status. They are partially physical, partially mental. For events, Russell says, but when I say writes like this, when I say event, I'm not talking something odd. Seeing a color is an event. Touching the coldness of a frog is an event. And smelling a rotten egg is an event. So events are there. But these events, they are partly physical and partly mental. They are neutral in their status. This is the neutral monism. This is the commitment. This is Russell said all this in view of his commitment, neutral monism. Russell said he has learned the importance of neutral monism from William James. From William James, from William James, Russell said he has learned the doctrine of neutral monism, where it says it is neither. It says here, Russell writes like this. Russell said, under the influence of William James, he subscribed to the philosophy of neutral monism, which does not believe in the distinction between physics and psychology. Consequently, the distinction between sensation and sense data no longer exists. Russell argues that the followers of behaviorist school tend to adopt a materialistic position and make psychology increasingly dependent on physiology and external observation, and think of matter something more solid than the mind. On the other hand, the physicists, especially Einstein and such of the relativity school, make matter less and less material. For them, everything consists of events from which matter is derived through logical construction. According to Russell, both the theories are not satisfactory, though each of them has an element of truth. Therefore, he feels the necessity to reconcile the materialistic tendency of psychology with the anti-materialistic tendency of physics, which he affects through neutral monism, according to which the whole world is made of neutral particles, which are neither physical nor psychical, but both. Russell was convinced that there is no fundamental opposition between physics and psychology. It is true that we can distinguish the particulars of psychology from that of physics. The particulars of physics are called appearances, while the particulars of psychology are called sensations. While physics places its particulars under active place, psychology places them under passive place. But these points of difference between the particulars of psychology and that of physics should not lead us to the conclusion that they are fundamentally opposed. Physics and psychology are not distinguished by their material. Mind and matter alike are logical constructions, the particulars out of which they are constructed or from which they are inferred have various relations, some of which are studied by physics, others by psychology. Broadly speaking, physics group particulars by their active places, psychology by their passive places. This is how Russell explains In his anxiety to deny the distinction between psychology and physics, Russell reduces the subject to a logical fiction. There is no distinction between subject and object in the philosophy of neutral monism, because according to it, there is no distinction between physics and psychology. So this kind of a neutral monism Russell developed in his work, namely Analysis of Mind, published in 1921. And since then, Russell sticks to the philosophy of neutral monism, according to which what we directly perceive are not sense data. They are events. They are events which are causally related to the external world. The world is there, external world is there. For example, I am seeing a color. The color that I am seeing here, it is not a sense datum, but it is an event. Seeing of the color is an event. It is causally related to the external world. The external world where the physical objects are there. This is this kind of position that Russell stick to here. So he has dispensed with the word sense data, because when the word sense data becomes meaningful, the word sense data becomes meaningful when something is given to the subject. But when there is no subject, the very idea of subject is dispensed with under the influence of neutral monism. Where is the need for sense need of giving to the subject? So the question of sense data does not arise, but in that place, Russell introduces events. Event is neither physical nor mental, but it is neutral in status. Russell stick to this neutral monism philosophy in his subsequent works, An Outline of Philosophy and My Philosophical Development. An Outline of Philosophy, I already told you that An Outline of Philosophy, this book was published in 1927, and My Philosophical Development. And in these works, Russell says that what we directly perceive are only events. Now here, there is one interesting thing that I want to tell you here. In this context here, where in his much later works, like An Outline of Philosophy and My Philosophical Development, there Russell not only stick to the philosophy of neutral monism, but he has switched over to the causal theory of perception again, which he originally told in his Problems of Philosophy. I told you already that in his Problems of Philosophy, Russell subscribed to causal theory of perception. He said that what we directly perceive are only appearances, which are causally related to the physical object. Physical object exists in physical space, which I do not know. My knowledge of physical object is beyond my grasp. Okay. This kind of causal theory Russell dispensed with in his next work, Our Knowledge of External World, where he subscribed to phenomenalistic position, but Russell's mind was oscillating. Russell thought that his philosophy should be in tune with the scientific experiments and in tune with science. Russell wants to adopt the method of physics, the method of science. He said that his method is analysis because scientific method is analysis. And Russell said that whatever Russell's feeling is, whatever he talks about the philosophy of perception or philosophy of knowledge must be in tune with the scientific researches. According to science, the external world is, I would not know, the color, shape, sizes of the external world, matter. That's the matter is there. The matter is divided of all the color, shape, sizes, etc. that we perceive. So therefore, matter is something more than that. But what I perceive is causally related to that matter. Matter exists in the external world. So this kind of a causal theory, which Russell already subscribed in the Problems of Philosophy, but it reappeared again in his much later works, like An outline of philosophy and my philosophical development. In these works, Russell subscribed not only neutral monism but also causal theory of perception. In his An Outline of Philosophy, Russell, sorry, 1 minute. I will take some water. Thank you. In his work An Outline of Philosophy, Russell writes like this. I conceive what happens when we see the object more or less on the following lines. For the sake of simplicity, let us take a small self-humanist object. In this object, a certain number of atoms are losing energy and radiating it according to the quantum principle. The resulting light waves becomes superposed according to the usual mathematical principles. Each part of each light wave consists of events in a certain region of space-time. On coming in contact with the human body, the energy in the light wave takes new forms, but there is still causal continuity. At last, it reaches the brain, and there, one of the constituent events is what is called a visual sensation. This visual sensation is popularly called seeing the object from which the light waves started or from which they were reflected if the subject was not self-luminous. Thus, what is called perception is only connected with the object through the laws of physics. Its relation to the object is causal and mathematical. We cannot say whether or not it resembles the object in any intrinsic respect except both it and the object are brief events in space-time. While explaining the relation between events, matter, and mind that are involved in the causal theory of perception, Russell held jocularly as follows. Where the philosopher's child at the zoo says, there is a hippopotamus over there, the philosopher should reply, there is a colored pattern of a certain shape which may perhaps be connected with a system of external causes of the sort called a hippopotamus. So, the causal theory of perception, Russell subscribed in his much later works because that is more closer to physics and other scientific researches. And in the same view, Russell continued in his My Philosophical Development in 1959. There, Russell subscribed to causal theory of perception, and there, Russell again demarcates between private space and physical space. The physical objects are there in the physical space, and the event that I perceive, the event, the color that I see, the shape I see, the sound I hear, it's an event. The event is in my private space. The physical object is in the physical space, and the connection between the event and the physical object is a causal connection. So the distinction between private space and the physical space, which Russell subscribed first in the problems of philosophy, subsequently denied in our knowledge of external world, again reappeared in the much later works like An Outline of Philosophy and My Philosophical Development. In his My Philosophical Development, Russell says he demarcated between three places in the process of perception of a star. They are the place where the star is in physical space. Suppose I see a star. There are three places, Russell said. There is a place where the star is in physical space, please underline. The place where the perceiver is in the physical space. I am a perceiver. I am also in the physical space. And the place where his percept of the star is among his other percepts. That means I am having a percept. The percept which I have It is there in my private space. But I am in physical space. The star is in the physical space. So there is a three places that are certain denies. So friends, I'm going to conclude within 5 or 6 minutes. Sorry, am I audible, sir?
Perfect.
Hello?
Perfect.
Audible. So thank you, sir. So my conclusions I have drawn after reading, so I have explained Russell's theory of knowledge from problems of philosophy to my philosophical development during these things. I thought over all these developments and I have drawn some conclusions. What are those conclusions I am going to read? There are 4 important conclusions I have drawn. One is, Russell is out and out a realist. He is one with G. Moore in refuting idealism of Berkeley. Moore, in his famous essay, The Refutation of Idealism, argued that sensation of blue is different from blue color. The blue color exists of itself, independent of perception of it. The blue color is the object of our sensation. Hence, objects exist independent of perception, and therefore the Berkeley's supposition that all is mind dependent is false. In a similar fashion, in his celebrated essay, An Appearance and Reality, Russell distinguishes between color and seeing of color. He said that though seeing color is mind dependent, color by itself is not. Thus, through his introduction of the notion of sense data, Russell advocated his realistic standpoint. In view of his commitment to neutral monism, though Russell abandons the notion of sense data in his later works, he still maintains the realistic position. In his later works, Russell replaces the word sense data with the word sense events and said that what we directly perceive are events which are causally related to the physical objects that could exist independent of their own. Thus, Russell maintained his realistic view throughout his works. This is my first conclusion. Secondly, Russell is a philosopher of science. While explaining perception, Russell was more akin to physics and its notion of matter. His approach is scientific. He supported the causal theory of perception because it is more close to mathematical physics. Though Russell subscribed to the phenomenalistic view of perception in his earlier work, Our Knowledge of the External World, he switches over to causal theory because it is more scientific. The method that Russell adopted is analysis, which is the method of science. Professor Weeds, one of the ablest commentators of Russell, remarked that Russell's primary interest has been the attempt to justify science. Thirdly, in Russell's works cited above, we find a kind of oscillation of ideas on our knowledge of the external world. For instance, he supported causal theory of perception in his Problems of Philosophy. However, in his subsequent work, Our Knowledge of the External World, he switched over to phenomenalistic view of perception. These are quite opposite doctrines. However, he came back to causal theory of perception in his much later works, as I discussed above. Thus, we find an oscillation or change of ideas in Russell's epistemology. But we must understand that this kind of conflict in Russell's philosophy as a progress towards truth. He was in search of truth, and in such an attempt, he supported some opposite ideas at different periods of time. In this context, it is apt to remember the words of Lytton Strachey, who said that Russell's mind is like a circular saw. The metaphor is particularly apt. The teeth on opposite sides of a circular saw move in opposite direction. In fact, the teeth are moving in every different direction at once, but the saw itself cuts across straight forward. In the same way, what Russell said in his different works at different periods of time, though appears to be contradictory, they finally aim at arriving at truth. Finally, Russell said that he was indebted to Whitehead when he learned that the whole conception of the world of physics as a construction rather than an inference. Similarly, he declared that under the influence of William James, he subscribed to the philosophy of neutral monism. This shows his honesty and faithfulness in his presentation of ideas. Thank you very much, friends, for giving me this wonderful opportunity. And I, I have presented what I know on Russell's theory of knowledge. Thank you very much, Professor Pandeyji. Thank you.
Thank you,
Hello?
Professor B. Sambhasiva Prasad. And
Yes, thank you, sir.
it was wonderful presentation, and you have given an overview of entire journey of Bertrand Russell. It is not a small task to cover entire development of Bertrand Russell's theory of knowledge,
No.
particularly in the context of sense data. That you have given us very good food for thought and food for discussion. So, if you allow, then we will take a few questions, sir.
Yes, please.
Okay, so questions are invited, and in the process, if you allow me, then I'll ask one question.
Yes, sir.
So I was just thinking that you have taken such a large perspective so far as the sense data views of Bertrand Russell is concerned, and you have made the distinction between earlier Bertrand Russell and later Bertrand Russell. I was just thinking in the context of A.J. Ayer and G. Moore, because they have also talked about sense data, and many other philosophers who talk about sense data. So
Yes,
I would just invite your view as to what are the peculiarities of Bertrand Russell vis-a-vis maybe like G. Moore and A.J. Ayer. Is there any difference between their perspectives? Because I was just thinking in one context, particularly that
yes,
what is the location of this sense data? Whether sense data resides between the subject and the physical objects, like a layer of screen, or the physical objects are basically caused. They causes this sense data, and physical objects basically they are made up of sense data so far as the knowledge is concerned, so far as the experience is concerned. Basically not knowledge but experience is concerned. So there are basically two perspectives. One is that sense data is the screen between the object and subject, and other is that sense data constitutes external object.
Yes,
I mean, if we take these two perspectives and for the sake of students' clarity, I might be very precise in my question, and I was just thinking about on these points only, so that students could be very much clear about how could the location of sense data be decided so far as these philosophers are concerned. But Bertrand Russell vis-a-vis G. Moore and Azair, I mean maybe some more. So it is your
yes, sir.
it is your privilege, sir, to reflect on this issue.
Yes, sir. Okay. May I answer, sir?
Yeah.
May I answer?
Yeah, you go.
Okay. I think that Professor Rakesh is ready with some questions. Sir, first let me answer Professor Pandey, sir, then I will take up. Rakesh is always active and with questioning mind. Okay. Sir, Professor Pandeyji, I did not actually the philosophy of sense. It is true that in Russell's writings, the problem of sense data is there. The issue of sense data has risen. As I told that when he distinguishes between appearance and reality, what we directly perceive, immediately perceive, like colors, shapes, sizes, etc., he calls it as sense data. And then he explains that the physical object is an inference. We infer the physical object from sense data. Something like that I told. Now, the question is, why this sense data philosophy at all? Where is the need to talk about sense data? There are physical objects like tables, chairs, mountains, rivers, sticks, and all these things. Can't we say that we directly perceive the physical objects? Can't I say that I directly perceive a table, a chair, or a pen, or an envelope? Can't I say like that? Now, the problem arose because here there is they say that A.J. Ayer's philosophy book, The Foundations of Empirical Knowledge. That is the book, if I am right, he published in 1940. The very first chapter is The Argument from Illusion. The Argument from Illusion. It is the title of the first chapter, where A.J. Ayer writes that suppose we are perceiving a physical object, say a stick half immersed in water. When the stick is half immersed in water, what I directly perceive is not the stick, but it is something else. Because I am perceiving the bentness there. What I directly perceive is the bentness because it is half immersed in water. What is this bentness? The kinkness or bentness, what is this? It is not the, when I can't say that I am seeing the stick because I cannot say I directly perceive the stick, because if I perceive the stick, why should I directly perceive the bentness? So what I am directly perceive is not the physical object, but it is something else. What is that something else? Then he calls it as the philosophers who subscribe this philosopher's data, like G. Moore and Bertrand Russell, C.D. Broad, and A.J. Ayer. These are all the different, and H.H. Price, especially H.H. Price. Here, H.H. Price, he introduces in his in a beautiful argument. The argument is the knowledge from certainty. That is the argument, and the argument is knowledge from certainty. He says, A.J. here, H.H. Price in his book Perception, he writes that suppose I directly perceive, suppose I say I perceive a wax, I perceive an apple. I say that is an apple, we say. But probably that may not be apple. If I go there and try to pick it out, that apple, and eat it, I may not eat it. I cannot, because probably it is a nicely painted piece of wax. It may be nicely painted piece of wax. It may be. So what I directly perceive is not the apple, but it is some red color, some a wax. I mean that an apple-like thing. First, that is the thing what I directly perceive, and afterwards I can verify whether it is an apple or not. And then I can say that is a second subsidiary question. So what I directly perceive is only it is not a physical object, it is not a material object, but something else, and this is what is called a sense datum. So the question of the sense data arise because of illusions and hallucinations. So there are different arguments are there in the advocated by the subscribers of a sense data, like the argument from illusion, the argument from certainty. The point of H.H. Price is what you certainly know is only sense datum, not the physical object, because it may be an illusion, like a painted piece of wax. So this is the thing with which the philosophers, they introduce sense data. They say we directly know sense data and immediately know sense data, and we know the physical objects later through these sense data. So they introduce sense data in between the physical objects and the percipients. Now, these sense data philosophers, they have been, because they introduced the sense data, they have been subjected to see some series of questions. The questions are, how many sense data you have seen within 5 minutes? I can say that I can see some physical objects. I can count and tell that these are the physical objects, but I cannot count the sense data. Whether the what is the size of the sense data, what is the shape, and what is the weight of the sense data. I can weigh a table, a physical object, but I can't weigh the sense data. So the critics pose these questions that the moment you introduce sense data, you have to answer some questions like what is the weight of sense data and like that, and you have to explain the relation between these sense data and the physical objects. You have to also explain knowledge of the physical object in terms of sense data. These problems will arise. Therefore, it is better not to talk about sense data, better talk only about physical objects. This is how the critics of sense data pose. In this context, Ayer, in his Foundations of Implicit Knowledge, he said, friends, sense data are not some other kinds of objects on par with physical objects like tables and chairs. No. They are only linguistic conventions. They are only verbal conventions in order to explain our knowledge of the external world. Instead of saying that I directly perceive a physical object, you can simply say I directly perceive a sense data which may be related to the physical object or not. Suppose if I see a cigarette case, I cannot say I'm directly seeing the cigarette case. Say that you are seeing some cigarette case like thing. This is the sense data. So sense data are not some other objects over and above the physical objects, but they are only verbal conventions. They have been introduced in order to explain your illusory and hallucinatory situations. Suppose now Moore and Russell, they say that you dreams, what do you see? And in illusions, what do you see? In illusions, I see a rope like a snake-like thing. But what is that? It is not snake. You are seeing some snake-like thing. That snake-like thing, for that they give the name sense data. So that we directly perceive sense data, not the physical objects. Why the sense data are introduced? The sense data are introduced in order to explain the illusory and perceptual situations. An illusory perceptual situation and a real perceptual situation, they do not vary, they do not differ in their, there is some common element is there. There is something. So here, the sense data are introduced only to explain these illusions and hallucinations. And the A.J. Ayer, especially you refer to A.J. Ayer, A.J. Ayer considers that the sense data are not some kind of objects like physical. Don't consider them as objects. They are only a verbal conventions. They are only in order to introduce in our language, in order to explain the physical objects. And then again, the supporters of sense data philosophy, like Moore, Russell, others, they say while physical objects are public, the sense data are private. The table is public. Different people could see the table, but my sense datum cannot be seen by other sense datum, by other people. Other sense data I cannot see. The colors, the shape, the sizes that I see cannot be perceived by other man. The other man's sense data I cannot see. So sense data are proprietary, sense data are short-living, and but physical objects are permanent, and physical objects are perceived by different people. This is how the distinction will ultimately they make, and all these things. You are telling that this is the thing that we must understand the situation, the reason why this sense data philosophy has been introduced. And the critics also, they arise that they are not necessary, and our perception of physical objects are enough. And we can, if we introduce sense data, we are multiplicating the entities. This is the argument.
Right, sir. That is wonderful.
Like
that is very good.
Okay.
What I wanted to emphasize on the differences among various philosophers so far as the nature of sense data is concerned. But that is like one question, and then now there is one research scholar, Diksha Shukla. She is willing to ask a certain question. So Diksha, you can ask your question now.
Okay, sir. I'm audible and visible, sir.
Yes.
Yes, Nisha, you are visible
Oh,
and audible.
okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It was privilege hearing you. And sir, my
Uh,
question is, what is neutral monism and
uh,
how far it would be correct to treat psychology and physics on the same plane? And sir, my
uh,
second question is, what is sensibilia?
mm, mm.
Okay.
Okay. Neutral monism here, the it is the philosophy which says there is no difference between psychology and physics. We can say that basically the they deal both the subjects psychology and physics. They deal with the basic substance of this universe. They are neither physical nor mental, but they are neutral in status. This is what the neutral monism says. I already explained to you here why this neutral monism philosophy has come into existence. For that, please wait 1 minute. The point of Russell is physics and psychology are not distinguished by their material. Mind and matter alike are logical constructions. The particulars out of which they are construed or from which they are inferred have various relations, some of which are situated by physics, others by psychology. Broadly speaking, physics group particulars by their active places, psychology by their passive places. Therefore, fundamentally, substance of this physics and psychology is one and the same. Therefore, it is they call it as the event. It is the event from which all my knowledge starts. That event is neither physical nor mental, but neutral. This is what it says like that. Now again, it says uh, an event according to Russell is something having a small finite duration and a small finite extension in space. Or rather, in view of the theory of relativity, it is something occupying a small finite amount of space-time. So, the neutral monism philosophy, it says, don't make a distinction between subject and object or psychology and physics. They all derived from the basics. The basic substance is one. Just like say Leibniz monads. Monads. You take a dear student friend. I am just talking about. Descartes makes a distinction between body and mind. Says there is one side, there is a body, that is mind. Descartes makes a distinction. Then he tried to explain the relation between body and mind like differently. But when you come to, so there are two relative substances according to Descartes. One is body, second is the mind. But when you come to Leibniz, what is the basic substance here? He calls them monads. There are many monads. Okay. What are monads? Monads are life. They are life forces.
Okay, Professor.
Yes, and they are neither physical nor mental, but neutral.
It will keep
in the same way, Russell talks about this.
All right, okay. Sir. It will keep on going. It will keep on
sir,
going.
There is one more. Yeah. She asked me about sensible. Sensibles are unperceived sense data. Just like there are the unmarried men. When they become married, they become husbands. So also the sensibles become sense data when the percipient perceives this sensibilia. Yes, this is what I want to tell. Yes, sir.
The only thing is that Professor Kantilal
Thank you so much, sir.
Professor Kantilal,
okay, thank you.
Professor Kantilal Das sir is here. So
Kantilal Das. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I am happy to join lately. So I am happy to hear the lecture of
Prasad. Sir, namaskar.
Okay, yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir, everybody. I think you are fine, sir.
Fine. Kantilal Das. I enjoyed your talk. Last time I enjoyed your talk.
Yeah, thank you. Professor Pandey, just a little bit of clarification. Would you please allow me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So now, actually, I missed the last portion of your deliberation. But actually, you just passingly remarked that Russell was a realist. Okay. So am I right? Okay. Now, would you please kindly uh, tell me that is Putnam actually in his recent writing, okay, actually classifies as there are various realism, okay. One is such a sense data realism or naive realism, another is metaphysical realism, another is pragmatic realisms, and Putnam himself was the believer of internal realism. Okay. So actually, Putnam's internal realism is based on a causal connection. Now you has claimed that Russell's theory of perception is based on causal connection. Okay, so can you actually give us a sense about the position of Russell's with regard to Putnam such a various aspect of realism, sir? Please.
Sir, Professor Tasji, one thing I want to tell is I have not much worked on Putnam's works, but why I said that Russell is a realist. This is my why I have made is the reason is this. Initially, Russell maintained a distinction between act of sensation and object of sensation, and he says the act of sensation, object of sensation is called sense data. Though the sensation is mind dependent, the object of sensation, namely sense data, they are independent of mind. And there is something that exists independent of mind, and therefore sense data are such data that they have an existence of their own. This goes against the philosophy of Berkeley's essays per se, therefore he is a realist. One thing. Suppose when Russell switches over to causal theory of perception, and he says that I have what I directly perceive are only events there which are causally related to the physical object. The physical object, according to Russell, is independent of your mind. It does not depend. The existence of physical object does not depend on our mind. Therefore, it is independent of your mind. So, therefore, the Berkeley's idealism can be also refuted equally but through the causal theory of perception. So, from this point of view, I have argued that Russell is a realist out and out, either in his early works or in the later works. I have not much work on Putnam, sir. I'm sorry, I do not know much about Putnam's philosophy.
But another addition, sir. Yeah, okay. Another addition that is how you find the distinction between sense data and hard data. Do you think that the sense data? Okay, yeah. Do you think that the sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think that sense data is at par with physical object, or there is a subtle distinction between physical object and hard data? So we have tri concept. One is sense data, another is hard data, and another is physical object. Please tell me a little bit about it.
Yes. Sir, the thing is here, data, now Russell said, is of two types. There may be data in his work, our knowledge of the external world. You have raised a very pertinent question, very good and intelligent and pertinent question, sir, Professor Dasji. Russell makes a distinction between soft data and hard data. This is what he made very clear in our knowledge of the external world in some passages. It is not there with me now, right now. He says soft data are the data which may be doubted. You can doubt that data. Suppose I say, I am acquainted with a physical object. I am acquainted with I say, I am seeing a table, or I am seeing a stick, or I am seeing an apple. They are only soft data because your perception of the table may be a dream. What you directly perceive may not be apple, and so on. So they may be soft data because the soft data are questionable, but hard data are the data which are beyond questions. I can doubt the existence of an apple, But I cannot doubt the existence of a red color, that a bulgy patch that I'm seeing. The red bulgy patch which I see is the hard data. That is beyond my doubt. I cannot doubt about that. That is the hard data. So sense data are the hard data. The physical objects are your soft data of your knowledge. This is how Russell makes a distinction between soft data and hard data.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank
Wonderful. Now, Professor Rakesh Chandra sir is here.
Rakesh is here. Rakesh sir.
Sir, unmute yourself. Sir, unmute yourself.
Sir, I have already unmuted.
No, Professor Rakesh, sir.
Professor Rakesh.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as Professor Pandey,
Rakesh ji, without your question, the seminar cannot be concluded. Please.
I just want to join Professor K.C. Pandey in congratulating you that you have taken a large body of work, because from 1904 to say about 1940, the whole body of Russell's writing in that to trace the idea of knowledge is really a very difficult task. The two things which I just wanted to bring as observation, one is that whenever we are discussing epistemology, then sometimes we take the question that what is knowledge, and then we take those distinctions that is knowledge a disposition or a skill, or is knowledge something that we get by acquaintance, or is knowledge something that we get by description. This is a kind of a discussion also which goes on very solidly in Russell. And then there is the other question about that what is it a knowledge of? And therefore, the discussions of knowledge in Russell, like in many other cases, get very intimately related to the metaphysics that you have. And therefore, I was wondering that, you were constantly switching between the metaphysical beliefs, because the question is that when he talks about sense data or sensa or sensibilia, then sometimes he does seem to be going away a little from bold realism to phenomenalism. And therefore, the position of phenomenalism and the position of naive realism, like the Moore kind, which Professor K.C. Pandey was asking, that, how do you position him with Moore and Ayer? Rightly said that Ayer takes a more linguistic position, but Moore is a more solid, realistic position. Therefore, I think that one point that I really wanted to share with you and share with the students as well, that in your kind of a discussion, it is very important, also difficult, to separate the epistemological questions of knowledge with the metaphysical questions about what it is a knowledge of. And in Russell, really it becomes very, very difficult, because at some times he seems to be favoring very much a naive realist position. And in some cases, particularly in early writing, he goes phenomenalistic. So that, I think, is a big difficulty with Russell. And I congratulate you once again for giving a very beautiful presentation. And I do think that the purely linguistic interpretation given by Ayer does not do justice to Russell. Because
last sentence I am not able to understand. Please repeat the last sentence.
My last sentence was that when you mentioned A.J. Ayer, and saying that sense data is only a linguistic convention, that I think is not doing proper justice to Russell, because Russell will not.
Sir, see, thank you very much, Professor Rakesh ji, for your wonderful questions. One thing I want to tell you is, see, when G. Moore, Russell, and C.D. Broad, he has written a book, The Mind and Its Place in Nature. C.D. Broad and H.H. Price, they all introduced the sense data. Now, there are a number of critics have come. They say that this sense data philosophy is a nonsense. There is no need for sense data philosophy. What we directly perceive only physical objects, and the sense data need not be introduced as intermediary entities between the physical object and the percipient. There is no need. The moment you introduce, then it leads to multiple questions. What is the relation between sense data and the material object? What is the weight of sense data? What is the, some questions will come like that. For that, A.J. Ayer, he said, friends, all these confusions are coming because critics considering sense data as some kind of entities on par with physical objects. But they are not entities. They are only linguistic conventions or verbal functions. This is how he introduced that. They are introduced only to explain your abnormal perceptual situations. When I perceive a snake-like thing, it is an abnormal situation. What I directly perceive there, it is not a snake, it is not a rope, but it is something snake-like thing. In order to explain this, what you directly perceive here in this illusion, your sense data will help you. You can say it's a snake-like thing like that. It is I directly perceive sense data, okay, instead of a material object. Only to that extent your introduction of sense data holds good. But the moment you confuse the sense data as independent objects, all these problems will arise. So, in order to answer to the critiques of sense data, Ayer has introduced is a linguistic interpretation of sense datum philosophy. This is one thing, sir. Second is, you told me, you made a remark that Russell was a naive realist in some works or something like that. But he was not a naive realism. He was out and out, he is against the naive realism or direct realism. What is the direct realism? Direct realism says we directly perceive physical objects. But Russell says, either in his early works or in his later works, Russell says what we directly perceive are only either sense data or events which are related to the physical object. When he says that they are sense data, Russell says that the material object is a composition of the sense data, actual and possible. When he says that they are events, Russell said that they are causally related to the physical object. In either case, Russell is not a supporter of naive realism or direct realism. Russell did not subscribe. In no way he subscribed to naive realism, and Russell is against for it. You are talking about the metaphysical metaphysics. Now here, neutral monism philosophy that Russell subscribed, it is a kind of a metaphysical monism. So his epistemology inquiry here, it entered into a metaphysical inquiry also here, because he says neutral monisms in philosophy there, he explains that the stuff of the world is neither physical nor mental, but neutral. It is a kind of metaphysics that Russell subscribed there. Sir, I do not know whether how far I could be able to answer your the questions that raised by you, sir.
Okay, there are many questions and there are many answers, and there are many approaches to Bertrand Russell. He has been interpreted in many ways. So
Russell said once, philosopher should raise questions should not for the sake of answers, but for the sake of questions themselves, because by reading the philosophical questions, it will broaden our mind. This is how Russell explains while discussing his value of philosophy, one of the important chapters in his Problems of Philosophy book.
Wonderful.
Philosophical questions should be studied for the sake of questions.
So is there any other question, or should we invite Dr. Rajni ma'am? Is there any other person to ask any question? Then most welcome.
Time wasting.
So I request Dr. Rajni Srivastava ma'am to please come and deliver formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Am I audible?
Audible, but your camera is to be adjusted, ma'am, little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. Nice. Now it's perfect, ma'am.
Thank you, Professor Pandey, for inviting me for this formal vote of thanks. I'm thankful to all who are present in this forum. First of all, I wish to thank Professor Prasad for his outstanding lecture on Russell's theory of knowledge. As you have covered all the major works of Russell on this topic, it's amazing. Your clarity of thought and simplicity in presentation is marvelous. We are all benefited from your lecture. Thank you, sir. I'm thankful to all the participants to whom I am seeing Professor Rakesh Chandra sir, Professor Kantilal Das sir. I'm thankful to all to whom I am seeing and not seeing. Professor Chandra for your observation, questions and insights. Professor Kanti Laldas for your observation. We are very thankful because it leaves seminar a very lively event. I wish to thank the coordinating team of this seminar. As our young scholars are taking this responsibility, they need a big thanks. And at last, I wish to thank Professor K.C. Pandey, Head Department of Philosophy, for his initiative and motivation for this Saturday seminar, because it is only because of his effort that this seminar is going on. We are very thankful to you, sir. Thank you all. Thank you very much, sir.
Now, thanks to everybody, and thanks to Dr. Rajni Srivastava ma'am, that now we come to conclusion of this edition of Saturday seminar, and we'll meet next time, and we'll post this, of course, in the YouTube, so you can enjoy later on. Also, you can ask questions to Professor B. Sambhasiva Prasad, and we all now come to an end of this wonderful event. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Now we are going to begin with the pre-PhD thesis submission presentation by our research scholar of our department. So please, scholars and teachers of our department are requested to please remain here and enjoy Sri Raj Kishore Chaurasia's presentation, which is on Vivekananda's philosophy.
Okay. I'll close this.
So, Raj Kishore Chaurasia is our scholar, and he is a very wonderful person, a very lovable boy, and he is so regular, and he has completed his PhD under Professor Rakesh Chandra sir, and as we are under the rules that there should be pre-PhD thesis presentation, so I invite Sri Raj Kishore Chaurasia to please come on dais and present his presentation, pre-thesis.
Pranam sir, Raj sir.
Okay, so this is Raj Kishore. Okay, now you can present your presentation, please.
सर नेटवर्क कुछ
कोई नहीं, आप बोल सकते हैं, कुछ भी बोलिए। ऑडियो, अगर वीडियो ना हो रहा हो तो ऑडियो बोल सकते हैं।
पीपीटी बनकर हमारा ऑर्डर है।
ठीक है, पीपीटी कर दीजिए।
विभागाध्यक्ष सभी
आप सभी लोग वेट करें, हो सकता है वो फिर से ज्वाइन करेंगे, क्योंकि वो कनेक्टिविटी कुछ इशू है। तो अभी हम लोग वेट करते हैं उनका फिर से जुड़ने का, राजकिशोर का। हाँ राजकिशोर, आप बोल सकते हैं।
जी सर, मेरा शोध विषय है योग। स्वामी विवेकानंद के दर्शन में योग की अवधारणा एक विश्लेषणात्मक अध्ययन। मैंने अपने शोध प्रबंध को 6 अध्यायों में विभाजित करके अनुक्रमणिका को पूर्ण किया है। और प्रथम मेरा अध्याय है योग। स्वामी विवेकानंद के प्रथम मेरा अध्याय योग की ऐतिहासिक पृष्ठभूमि तथा केंद्रीय प्रत्यय। योग की ऐतिहासिक पृष्ठभूमि, प्रथम भाग, इसके 2 भाग हमने किए हैं। प्रथम भाग है इसका योग का ऐतिहासिक पृष्ठभूमि, इसमें योग के बारे में पहले योग को प्रायः एक
राजकिशोर,
हाँ
आप जो है,
ठीक है।
आप ऑडियो बोल सकते हैं। अगर पीपीटी ना चल रहा हो तो ऑडियो बोल सकते हैं। 5 मिनट ऑडियो बोल दीजिए, हो गया।
एक अभ्यास एक संस्कृत चर्या के
ठीक है, ऐसे ऑडियो बोल दीजिए बस।
की उत्पत्ति किस प्रकार हुई है, इसके लिए जब हम योग ध्यान चित्त की एकाग्रता जीवन के अंग रहे हैं। वेदों में योग के प्रारंभ से हमें लिखित रूप में योग शब्द अर्थ सहित प्राप्त होता है। चाहे हम उसे ऋग्वेद अर्थों में प्राप्त होता है। ऋतंभरा प्रज्ञा में योग की चर्चा योग सिद्ध के रूप में प्राप्त हो। अधिक अर्थ उप अर्थात समीप है। सामान्य ईस केन कट प्रश्न मुंडक है जिसमें समस्त अध्ययन ये कहा हो हे कर्मों को तुझे नमस्कार करते प्राप्त होता योग के नाम से ही प्राप्त होते हैं। इस आधार पर सूत्रों न्याय सूत्र, वैशेषिक सूत्र, मीमांसा महर्षि पतंजलि का योग
राजकिशोर, हाँ राजकिशोर, बहुत ज्यादा कनेक्टिविटी प्रॉब्लम है बेटा। हेलो, हाँ राजकिशोर, आप जो है आपका प्रेजेंटेशन मान लिया गया है ना? ये मान लिया जाता है कि आपने प्रेजेंट कर दिया, क्योंकि ये बहुत कनेक्टिविटी प्रॉब्लम है। आज आप परेशान मत होइए, है ना? आपका प्रेजेंटेशन हमने मान लिया कि आपने प्रेजेंट कर दिया। आप कभी डिपार्टमेंट में आकर के यहाँ पे आप जो बोल रहे हैं वही डिपार्टमेंट में कर दीजिएगा, यहाँ कनेक्टिविटी ठीक होती है। अच्छा, आपको सर्टिफिकेट इशू हो जाएगा।
जी,
आपको सर्टिफिकेट इशू हो जाएगा। जो
अच्छा
आप जो पढ़ना चाहते हैं डिपार्टमेंट में कर दीजिएगा, ठीक है? आज आपकी कनेक्टिविटी ठीक नहीं है तो डिपार्टमेंट में हो जाएगा, ये आपका सर्टिफिकेट इशू हो जाएगा, ठीक है?
अच्छा सर, मेरी ठीक सर, थैंक यू सर।
ये आवाज़ तो आपकी आ रही है, अगर आप बोलना चाहें तो बोल सकते हैं, लेकिन कनेक्टिविटी प्रॉब्लम हो रही है ना। तो आप जो है ये समझिए कि आपका प्रेजेंटेशन मान लिया जाता है। आप कोई किसी तरह का
क्या ठीक से
हाँ, किसी तरह का टेंशन मत लीजिए। आप जो है आप विभाग आकर के जब चाहेंगे आप प्रेजेंट कर सकते हैं। ओके, सो क्योंकि
ओके सर।
हाँ, क्योंकि ये कनेक्टिविटी
आवाज सर मेरी बिल्कुल नहीं है।
हाँ, नहीं आ रही, कट के आ रही राजकिशोर। सो क्योंकि ये कनेक्टिविटी प्रॉब्लम है, इसलिए अब हम यही ख़त्म करते हैं आज आपका प्रोग्राम। और आप जो है वो मान लिया जाता है कि आपने प्रेजेंट करने की पूरी कोशिश किया है अपने लेवल पे। आप जब कनेक्टिविटी ख़राब है तो कोई कुछ नहीं कर सकता है, लेकिन यह है कि अब आपका इसी बेसिस पे सर्टिफिकेट इशू हो जाएगा, जिसको कि आप पीएचडी थीसिस में आप बाइंड करा सकते हैं। अच्छा, अब जो है ये डिपार्टमेंट आकर के आप चाहें तो आप डिपार्टमेंट आकर के जो प्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं वहाँ प्रेजेंट कर सकेंगे। ओके
ओके सर।
ओके,
ओके, थैंक यू।
सी यू एवरीबॉडी, सी यू, थैंक यू एवरीबॉडी, थैंक यू राकेश सर, प्रशांत, डॉक्टर प्रशांत शुक्ला, डॉक्टर रजनी श्रीवास्तव, थैंक यू एवरीबॉडी, ऑल द टीचर्स, ऑल द स्कॉलर्स, ऑल द स्टूडेंट्स, थैंक यू एवरीबॉडी, thank you for joining today.